BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNid88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And welcome to BBOR, the home of true crime talk radio and your premier destination for unsolved mysteries, criminal psychology, and exploring the dark side of cyberspace. My name is Ned DeHaan, and I am your host, as well as the creator of AstroPsych 400 here on YouTube, and regular contributor to the Zodiac Killer channel. And a great way to support these shows is just by listening to some more content. But you can also go over to Amazon.com and have a look at the book Killer on a White Horse, written by me, Ned DeHaan. It is a novel, murder mystery, inspired by the Zodiac Manson connection, but it is indeed fictional. However, who doesn't love a good mystery? And there is always the TeeSpring page. Feel free to check out some of the merchandise. And remember, being weird is not a crime. Let the show begin. Okay, hello everybody. Today is Friday, another Anything Goes Friday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? I would like to drop a couple of announcements and reminders before we truly begin. The first is that there is a regular segment about JonBenet Ramsey that now comes out on the weekends here on Black Box Online Radio, and I will be launching a new book discussion for the weekend segment on The Death of Innocence, the book that was actually written by JonBenet's parents, John and Patsy Ramsey. And on Wednesdays, I am doing a regular segment about Jack the Ripper, and the Wednesday show has been revolving in terms of topics. For the longest time, I did the AMA, the Ask Me Anything, where I responded to your questions and comments. But now I use the questions and comments in almost every single episode here on Black Box Online Radio. This is a show where I interact with the listeners to the program. So I hope you guys will have something to say about today's episode, and please put your ideas in the comment section down below. But for a while on the Wednesday segment, I was talking about the Long Island serial killer, and I'm going to have to revisit that mystery at some point for some type of multi-part discussion. And multiple people have recommended a particular book to me called Jimmy the King by Gus Garcia Roberts. The full title is Jimmy the King, Murder, Vice, and the Reign of a Dirty Cop. And I would just like to read that description for you. An incredible 4-decade account of murder, power, and corruption in one of the country's largest police departments. In 1979, the gruesome slaying of a 13-year-old boy riveted the suburbs of Suffolk County, New York. As the county hustled to bring the case to a dubious resolution, a wayward local teenager emerged with a convenient story to tell. For his cooperation, Jimmy Burke was rewarded with a job as a cop. Thus began Burke's unlikely ascent to the top of one of the country's largest law enforcement jurisdictions. He and a crew of like-minded allies utilized vengeance, gangster tactics, and political leverage to become the most powerful and feared figures in their suburban empire, until a pilfered bag of sex toys brought it all crashing down. Jimmy the King is the story of the rise, reign, and paranoiac fall of a corrupt cop and his regime, of a crime family with badges and guaranteed pensions. Novelistic in detail and piercing in its political insight, this book will leave you questioning who modern policing serves, who it protects, and who it preys upon, and who it abandons. And once again, this book is written by Gus Garcia Roberts, Jimmy the King. And some of you might be wondering, well, what exactly does that have to do with the Long Island serial killer mystery? And I would like to go right over to an article from Distractify that will answer that question very clearly. James Burke is a Long Island serial killer suspect. James Burke was a police chief thought to be involved somehow. Former Suffolk County Police Chief James Burke is thought to be a person of interest, and some who have followed the Long Island serial killer case believe he was the culprit. He was rumored to have had relations with local sex workers before potentially putting him in circumstances where he might have crossed paths with Shannon Gilbert, one of the possible Long Island serial killer victims. However, no charges have ever been brought against Burke, and he has never been considered an official suspect by law enforcement in the case. But some people simply think that that's the answer to the Long Island serial killer mystery, that a high-ranking member of law enforcement was responsible. And even if we get away from the name Jimmy Burke and start thinking about some other possibilities, that theory could still hold water, that the reason why there's been an unsolved serial killer mystery is because someone had police connections, someone had law enforcement connections, and as the description of the book stated, who are the members of law enforcement protecting? And it always comes back to that particular statement. Who is there to guard the guards themselves from Juvenile? And I learned about that because of the true crime world, because it was stated by Fred Murray, the father of Maura Murray, who went missing from Haverhill, New Hampshire in 2004. He said, "Who is there to guard the guards themselves?" It's this quote from Juvenile. It's all about how people who are supposed to protect us can abuse their power. And a lot of people are very suspicious in the Long Island serial killer case. But the Long Island serial killer was a serial killer who operated possibly from 1996 to 2010. And there is a big divide in some of the hypothesizing in this particular mystery because the first Long Island serial killer victim was the Fire Island Jane Doe, whose remains were found in 1996. Only her legs, actually. Her skull was not found until years later. And in 1997, the body of Peaches Jane Doe was discovered, and Peaches was thought to have been possibly a Long Island serial killer victim. On some lists, you'll see that she's a confirmed victim. On other lists, you'll see that she is a possible victim. She gets the nickname because of a peach tattoo that she had. And it's possible they've even identified the tattoo artist who did that, but still, she remains unidentified to this day. And her daughter was also murdered, who has been referred to as Baby Doe. Then, in the year 2000, we saw the murder of Valerie Mack, who was identified in 2018 because of DNA. In 2003, Jessica Taylor was murdered. And all of these women so far were not only murdered, but mutilated and dismembered. In 2007, there was the murder of Cherry's Jane Doe, and she is a possible victim of the Long Island serial killer. The difference is her body was not found disposed in the same way. She was actually found with some of her remains in a suitcase. But in the past, I've said that I thought very highly that Cherry's Jane Doe actually was a victim of the Lisk. And then in 2007 as well, there is some type of change in the killer's activity. The Long Island serial killer was not dismembering the bodies of the victims anymore, but then turned to strangulation. And this is when we see the murders of the Gilgo Four. The first was Maureen Brainerd Barnes, and then Melissa Bartolome, Megan Waterman, and Amber Lynn Costello. In between the second and third victims, a woman named Shannon Gilbert went missing, and she goes on to become the most famous person in the Long Island serial killer mystery. However, she is listed as an unconfirmed victim. Shannon Gilbert was an escort who went to meet a client named Joe Brewer, and she was driven there by Michael Pack. That was her driver, that was his occupation. And something happened to Shannon Gilbert, and there's even an extended 911 call where Shannon is recorded saying some very bizarre things. And ultimately, her remains were discovered, found in a marshy area near Oak Beach, I believe, actually. She starts out on Oak Beach, and then, then she moves toward Gilgo Beach, and she's found on the opposite side of the parkway from the other victims. And because this is a show where I interact with the questions and comments from the listeners, I have noticed that I have made some particular errors in the Long Island serial killer mystery in the past, and one of them was that I stated that some of the bodies were buried in the ground, and the source that I was citing, the source I was citing was something that I had seen back in 2012. There was this graphic of burlap sacks that were tied up with rope and buried in the ground, but it doesn't appear that the killer actually put that much work into disposing of the bodies. Excuse me, the person who disposed of the bodies did not put that much work into the disposal process. At least two of the victims were rolled into burlap and they were thrown into the brush. But I truly regret saying that because I I've received a lot of backlash on on the channel, but I would like to read a particular comment. It comes to us from Civil War Now, and this is a lengthy one, but I'm going to start out with, get your facts straight, none of the victims were buried. Okay, yes, I completely admit that I stated something without thoroughly checking it. That's why we have a part two and a part three and a multi-part series of discussions, and nobody's perfect, of course. And there was another comment that generated a lot of backlash, and that was when I was discussing Michael Pack's deposition. Again, he was Shannon Gilbert's driver, and in the deposition, they're asking him a series of questions that talk about how he went to school, and they say, "Did you go to college? Did you go to a university?" And he says, "Yes." Then they say, "Did you graduate?" And he says, "Yes." And they ask him, "What kind of degree did you get, a Bachelor of Arts or a Bachelor of Science?" And he says, "I don't remember." And I said, "What's wrong with this guy? I can't imagine that a college graduate would forget what type of degree he had. Was his brain fried on drugs or something?" And somebody in the comments section responded by saying, "Well, you are taking into account how nervous he must have been. Imagine being interrogated for 27 hours and then someone randomly asks you, 'What was the name of your fourth grade teacher?'" And my response was, "Oh, I'm not going to forget her. Her name was Mrs. Adams, and she was the source of a lot of emotional trauma for me, and I didn't even have a problem with her. It was her. She was the one who didn't like me, and she had her reasons for that. But there was another comment that more or less came to my defense from Colonel Reb saying, "You were right to call that guy out. That is a weird thing to forget. By the way, my fourth grade teacher was Mrs. Holly," and obviously I'm going to be on his side a little bit more. But the full comment from Civil War Now says, "I barely remember my degree as a bachelor's degree in arts and sciences. You remember your major, political science, not your degree. I don't know, bud, you did pretty good, remembering it right there. Pack is a lowlife that gets his jollies from driving escorts. Yes, my fourth grade teacher was Mr. Mallow, but you can't expect everyone to remember that." And being very clear, they did not ask Michael Pack that in the deposition. Somebody in the comments here on Black Box Online Radio added that as a follow-up. I agree with the commenter. I can see why your fourth grade teacher hated you. I shouldn't find that funny, but I do. My fourth grade teacher was rough on me because he loved me. I hate to tell you this, but no, he was not. If you think that someone in that position was being rough on you because he loved you, no, he was not. He was doing that to fuel his own sense of self-importance and getting pleasure from momentary domination. That's what that type of behavior leads to. And also, what's your point? He was a jerk to you, and now you're a jerk to people on the internet? Yeah, that's some quality stuff right there. And this continues by saying, "I had no idea a few years after I graduated about my degree type. I had to look at my diploma. I needed to know the type for law school applications." Well, you remembered it pretty well after that, and by the way, I still think that would be a weird thing to forget. You can't harp on very stupid minor points to solve this crime. Good God. Well, that's not going to solve the, the case. I mean, I just thought that was an odd thing for somebody to forget. And do you see how people will try to crucify you for statements that might not even be relevant to the Long Island serial killer mystery? Joe Brewer is a liar. Again, that's the client of Shannon Gilbert's that she was seeing right before she had right before she disappeared. Joe Brewer allegedly passed a polygraph. He pled the Fifth Amendment because he did not want to be arrested as a John. That's during the deposition. Paying for sex is illegal. Listen to the 911 call. Shannon becomes horribly frightened inside Brewer's house. Okay, this is the point when I actually have to disagree with you, Civil War Now. And this isn't about anything like, okay, who remembers what. This is a genuine dispute in the Long Island serial killer list of facts. I've heard the 911 call. You can even go to an episode of Black Box Online Radio where I play the 911 call in its entirety, or at least the portions that were made available to the general public if there is more. I shared what they had shared, then it's not available. And there is something that I would truly dispute with you. Shannon Gilbert becomes horribly frightened inside Brewer's house, but not of him. I don't know why more people aren't talking about this. I don't know why more people aren't zoning in on this fact that Shannon Gilbert wanted to stay in Joe Brewer's house. Very clearly, he's telling her to leave. You can listen to the 911 call for yourself, and you will hear this. Not only is he telling her to leave, he's saying that he wants to keep the door open so she can go outside. What she is saying is that she is afraid of someone or something outside, and she believes that Michael Pack, the driver, was involved with them. And we don't even know if there actually is a them. This could just be some type of issue with Shannon Gilbert having a manic episode. Shannon Gilbert did indeed have bipolar disorder, and she was not properly medicated for it. And ultimately, that is what I believe happened to Shannon, that she had a a manic episode and that she passed away in the marshy area around Long Island. But that is just something that I think is so much more important. And very few people are talking about this, that she wants to stay in Joe Brewer's house. And he's even just saying that he wants her to get out. That means that she is not afraid of him. She is not terrified of him. She's terrified of someone or something else. So that is not something that favors his guilt and all. But the final thing that I would like to read from this comment here is talking about Shannon's possible manic episode, and that also, I mean, this is also from Civil War Now. A lot of conjecture about Shannon from you and acting erratically and having a manic episode. Pack did say that she was bipolar and did not take meds for fear of weight gain, but he also testified that she rarely used drugs, especially while working, and that the only exception would be if a client wanted her to snort some cocaine with her. But yes, he also does state that she drank alcohol and smoked marijuana as a way of dealing with her bipolar disorder. Pack testified that she never acted erratically. It only takes one time. I mean, it only takes one time for her to have this level of disorientation. Are you working for the Suffolk County PD? No, I'm not. I stood in the place where Shannon was found. The soles of my sneakers got slightly moist. She did not drown, and it was unseasonably warm that May morning. Okay, the water level in a marsh is going to vary. I mean, it's not going to be the same on marshy terrain, and I think that just goes without saying. So I highly doubt that this person was there on the day that Shannon passed away. Her body was found near Ocean Parkway like all the rest. Stop guessing, you have no idea. But Shannon's body was the only one who was found on the opposite side of the parkway. They were all on the bodies of the Long Island serial killer victims are found on the south side of the Ocean Parkway, and Shannon's body was found on the north side of the parkway. And when they released the 911 call, law enforcement stated very clearly that that's one of the reasons why they believe that Shannon Gilbert was not murdered by the Long Island serial killer. Now, was Shannon murdered or not? I mean, I don't know. And the reason I'm saying that is this ties into the final line from Civil War Now. Stop guessing. You have no idea. Yeah, you're right, I have no idea what happened. But stop guessing? No, absolutely not. And this is one of the reasons why people are exploring these types of ideas, because we're trying to understand something that doesn't quite make sense to everyone. And I think that there's something inappropriate about saying that you're not going to consider different possibilities. You're not going to investigate. And you're not going to examine ideas, because when you have a set of information that is put in front of you, I don't think there's anything wrong with challenging certain aspects of it. When you look at two ideas and you're like, wait a second, I don't think these two match up. Or even better yet, when someone puts forward an idea and you're thinking, wait a second, does that really make sense? And that's what I think Black Box Online Radio is truly about. When someone shares something and you just have this type of curiosity about the subject, and you want to find out, is it really true? And sometimes you find that there is a bitter truth that you have to swallow, and on the other hand, sometimes you find out that no, it's just a complete fiction that has been misrepresenting the story the entire time. And right now, I would like to switch gears and move on to the next segment here on this True Crime Talk radio broadcast. And as always, you can hit the like button, subscribe if you want to follow along with these true crime discussions. You can also put your ideas in the comment section down below, and you can recommend topics for future episodes. But if anyone would like to support these efforts, you can share Black Box Online Radio on social media, and you can also go over to BuyMeACoffee.com. There's a link to that in the description box, BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNed88, and that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout-out on Zodiac Monday. Every Monday is Zodiac Monday here on Black Box Online Radio. But I would like to revisit the 1983 murder of Dorka Lisker. In 2021, I did an episode about this for the Anything Goes Friday segment called Interrogation: The Murder of Dorka Lisker, and there was a conviction that was made in this case. Dorka Lisker's own son, Bruce Lisker, was convicted, and he served 26 years in prison for murdering his mother. And I should point out that he was her adoptive son, not a blood relative, but he was adopted, and his story became the subject of the Paramount Plus original show Interrogation. And to confess something, I don't know why this isn't more popular. I don't know why this particular show wasn't a bigger hit, because I thought it was brilliant. It was one of those series where you had to watch the first episode, and then you could watch all the other episodes in any order you wanted, except for the finale. Like, you have to watch the first episode first, and you have to watch the last episode last, and then you could watch the other episodes in any order, and it's this non-linear story that is going back and forth throughout the events of not only the murder of Dorka Lisker, but also through the trial and the prison life of her son. But all the names were changed for the show. Dorka Lisker's name was Mary Fisher, and her son, Bruce Lisker, they changed his name to Eric Fisher, and there is another possible suspect in the murder named John Michael Ryan, and his name was changed to Chris Keller, and the detective that is trying to vilify, well, Eric in the show, was really named Andrew Monsu, but they changed his name to Dave Russell, so all the names were altered. And Dorka Lisker was murdered and found dead inside of her Sherman Oaks home, and she had 2 knives in her back. However, 5 different weapons were used in the murder of Dorka Lisker. The 2 knives, as well as an exercise bar, a piece of cord, and a baseball trophy, or a trophy of sorts. And the big question that you're supposed to be exploring throughout the show Interrogation is, did he do it or not? Like, is this guy actually guilty? And you really have to make a differentiation between the fictional version or the dramatization of Eric Fisher versus the real life person Bruce Lisker. But as I said, Bruce Lisker served 26 years in jail for the murder of Dorka Lisker, and then he was released and his conviction was overturned, and he won a settlement for wrongful conviction. But the first comment that I would like to respond to is from Mauricio Islas, who says, "I still think Bruce is involved. I don't know why, but it's a gut feeling." And I think that I am in somewhat of a divided stance. I have a divided stance, rather, and that is that with the dramatization, with this Eric Fisher persona that they created for the show, almost certainly I think that that person was an active participant in his mother's murder. With the real life Bruce Lisker, I have no idea. But one of the challenges that the show would ask you to do is to follow the evidence. It was to say, what does the evidence suggest? And there was a particular window that had panes of glass that could be removed, and they were taken out and neatly placed in a stack. And this is coming from a guy who said that he walked over, saw his mother on the floor with 2 knives sticking out of her back, and he was trying to get in as fast as he could, but then he neatly placed the glass panes in a stack. That that just suggests that most likely he wasn't the killer, but he was an active participant. Why do I say most likely he wasn't the killer? Because there's that person, Chris Keller, whose real name was John Michael Ryan, who is a much stronger suspect for committing the homicide. And I don't really know this 100%. I don't have any proof of this, but they named him Chris Keller in the show, and I thought that that was supposed to sound like killer, Keller versus killer. I think that that was rather intentional. The second comment is from Ben Drankin3, who says, I think can all agree Chris was for sure there, and Eric seems too soft to do something like that. Only hard thing to figure out is, why would Chris go into Eric's room? And as I said, a trophy was used as one of the weapons that was, um, well, used for the murder of Dorka Lisker, or fictional version Mary Fisher. And why would he do that? Well, John Michael Ryan was a friend of Bruce Lisker, and that could have been a place that he was familiar with. There could have been an altercation that had taken place, and you might be wondering, why is he in the house at all? Well, to recap some things from that, they believe that the motivation for the murder was breaking into the house because there was $150 that Dorka Lisker had, which was given to her by her ex-husband as grocery money. He would give her $150 every week for grocery money, and that Eric Fisher and Chris Keller had this plan to steal the money. And that's why I said it seemed like Bruce or Eric was an active participant in the robbery, but then the robbery got out of control, and that she was stabbed and beaten with the blunt objects, as well as strangled with the cord. And again, the dramatization of interrogation really tried to show some pieces of evidence saying the cord directly belonged to Chris Keller, real name John Michael Ryan, and they showed some very strong supporting points for that. But again, if you do watch the show Interrogation, I was really surprised how many facts they actually used. I mean, it's a dramatization. It's a story that's inspired by true events. They can do whatever they want for their TV show, but they really stayed to the script for the most part, aside from changing everybody's name. And if you go back and watch the show in 48 hours, or you read about it online, they're really telling the same story, more or less. I mean, with a few details have been changed. It's not like 100% word for word, but it was pretty close. And if anybody would like to hear more about that case, I invite you to listen to my episode, Interrogation, the Murder of Dorka Lisker. And if anybody does watch the show Interrogation, available on Paramount Plus, you can write me at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. I would love to discuss that with you. And also, I should say that it's about 18 months since I've watched that show, but it still has it. I still have it somewhat fresh in mind, and I will try my best to keep up with any discussions that you guys have, or questions and challenges that you guys have. But rest in peace to Dorka Lisker, as well as all of the victims of the Long Island serial killer. But right now, I would like to shift again and talk about a case that came to my attention in 2022, and that is the story of the Chinese Zodiac killer. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this one was I find that I cover a lot of subjects here on Black Box Online Radio, but I absolutely do not remember them all. And I find, when I'm walking down the street trying to go to the bus or something like that, I'm just like, wait a second. What was that thing that happened? What was that true crime video that I was watching? What are all the names? What are all the dates? What are all the places? Do you ever just get lost in your imagination? You're trying to think about something and you find that there's this type of mental pothole or something. That's what I felt about the Chinese Zodiac killer recently. But there was an article that came out about a month and a half ago on the Chinese Zodiac killer, Jesse Bartlett. Self-described Chinese Zodiac killer pleads guilty in Albany case. Feds said Jesse Bartlett mailed more than 100 threatening letters, including one to the White House, boasting of past murders, rape, and consumption of human flesh. Albany, New York. In scores of letters identifying himself as the Chinese Zodiac killer, Jesse Bartlett claimed he killed people and ate their flesh, and that hell wants more souls, and that he intended to kill more victims. In U.S. District Court in Albany on Friday, the 46-year-old Bartlett made a far less controversial admission. He's guilty of sending threatening letters. Bartlett of Lafargeville in Jefferson County admitted to Chief U.S. District Judge Brenda Sands that he sent letters between April of 2021 and May of 2022 to government offices including the White House, houses of worship, media outlets, and private businesses in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, Vermont, and Washington, D.C. Bartlett faces up to 5 years in prison and 3 years of supervised release by sentencing by Sands, but could face lesser time under sentencing guidelines. I mean, you're talking about time in prison. Yes, absolutely, this guy broke the law, but just from the case at face value, it seems like he is dealing with some very intense mental derangement issues. The case, which involved the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force, which was assisted by the state police and the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, drew attention a year ago when Capital Region television news stations received letters from the supposed Chinese Zodiac killer. The FBI in Albany asked media outlets to be on the lookout for similar types of letters. No such letters were received by the Times-Union, which in August of 1973 received a cryptic letter from a person claiming to be the notorious Zodiac killer in California. Unlike the Zodiac killer in California, who was blamed for killing 5 people and wounding 2 others in the late 1960s in the San Francisco Bay Area, Bartlett has not been charged in any homicide cases. And I said that this guy seems to be somewhat mentally deranged, being very clear. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a psychiatrist or anything like that. Again, just making an unprofessional observation. But you do see a very big difference between this guy's behavior and that of the Zodiac in California in the 1960s. And yes, the Zodiac letters carried on well into the 1970s, possibly beyond. But those letters appear to be very direct, very specific, very precise, not just mailing hundreds of letters all at once to the best of her knowledge. And this guy just seems like he is just exploding and overwhelmed with emotion, whereas the Zodiac of California appears to be cold, methodical, and calculating. The FBI tracked down Bartlett and watched him drop 21 envelopes into the U.S. Postal Service bins in Watertown and Clayton. 3 days later, Bartlett dropped 21 more letters off in Watertown. Investigators found 42 letters in the bins. Do you see what I mean? This guy's just on overdrive, whereas the Zodiac of the 1960s appears to be very specific with whom he's mailing letters to, particularly things like the 1970 Halloween card, which is directed specifically to Paul Avery, the 1969 Melvin Belli letter, which is directed specifically to Melvin Belli, and so on. And again, it's not like he's dropping 21 letters to different lawyers at once, to the best of our knowledge, but I think you get the idea. In a detention hearing in May, Assistant U.S. Attorney Alexander Wentworth Payne told the U.S. Magistrate Judge Christian Hummel that the walls of Bartlett's home contained messages for the FBI. Bartlett, a school bus driver, had allegedly threatened to murder an unidentified bus driver, and Bartlett, who holds interest in the occult and black magic, had identified himself as late British occultist Aleister Crowley on the Trail of Registries at the Adirondack Mountains. Then he referenced it in a letter, the prosecutor said. At the hearing, the prosecutor noted that in April of 2020, Bartlett fatally shot a one-time friend he said invaded his home and threatened to kill him. Well, I mean, I think if anyone had any doubts about his mental instability, then that should definitely lean toward a particular direction. Prosecutors said Bartlett had claimed that he is a sexual predator on the hunt for your women at all times. So, an example of a letter that was sent was mailed to the Newsday in Melville, Long Island, stating, "I have already killed someone in the New York area. Hear my prophecy. I will kill again. Hell wants more souls. I am a sexual predator and a killer among the living. I am not hiding. I am very easy to find. Because I need to be found, I must test you." A little bit like the Zodiac of California, a little bit like Jack the Ripper in the From Hell letter. I mean, this whole thing about being uh, Hell Wants More Souls, and even the New Orleans Axeman letter, which was mailed in 1919, was it? The New Orleans Axeman operated from 1918 to 1919, and possibly in the earlier part of that decade, but that case really does not have a beginning or an end in exact sight, because it is almost impossible to say how many crimes have actually been attributed to the Axeman. And the letter goes on to say, "I made it clear that I would make an example of anyone who has knowledge of me that refuses to educate the public of my existence." That, I think, is a little bit different than the Zodiac of California. The Zodiac of California would say something more to the effect of, I'm mad that I didn't get the front page. I'm going to mail a letter to the LA Times because they don't bury me in the back pages. So this one is definitely more deranged. The Zodiac of California was just more of a whiny little jerk off, to be honest. But that is my take on the subject, and that is an update on the Chinese Zodiac killer. Thank you so much for anyone who's listened to this episode. And I would expect, if you've made it all the way to the end, then you're going to have something to say about some of these stories. The Long Island serial killer, about the murder of Dorka Lisker in the show Interrogation, about the Chinese Zodiac killer. Well, share something in the comments section down below. Say what you think, and your comment might end up in a future episode on Black Box Online Radio. Once again, thank you again for listening, and anybody can write the show at blackboxonlineradio@AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box, and there is always BlackBoxNid88, and I will see you over there for the bonus podcast. Until next time.